today's top boxing news.
Okay, we'll start with this. A bit of news out of the women's welterweight and super welterweight division. Unbeaten up-and-comer from the UK, Dee Allen, will be in action this weekend in what looks to be a takeover fight opposite the ring veteran journeywoman of Brazil, Helena de los Santos.
Six-rounder at junior middle.
De los Santos, a journeywoman with losses in double digits, having lost her last 8 fights consecutively. This is just about keeping Dee Allen busy en route to what is potentially a bigger fight.
A bigger fight in October for the EBU title at welterweight.
Opposite the ring, Beauchamp.
My thoughts.
Because this fight is being fought at 154 pounds, and because 3 of the 4 major titles at 154 have recently gone vacant as a result of Natasha Jonas, then unified champion, moving down to welterweight, perhaps Dee Allen, unbeaten up-and-comer Dee Allen, that sports professional record of 5 wins, no losses, and no draws.
3 knockouts.
Perhaps she might want to stay up there and campaign as a junior middle moving forward, because there are 3 separate world title opportunities up there that might be easier to land, might be perhaps easier to procure than a fight at 147. There are bigger names at 147. There's Jessica McCaskill, Sandy Ryan, Natasha Jonas, who recently moved down there, became IBF champion.
There are bigger names, but how many of those fights are actually realistic? How many of those fights are easier to land? Easier to land than, say, a world title opportunity at 154.
Pros and cons of pursuing a title at 147 as opposed to 154. Dee Allen's physical dimensions, I believe she's adequately suited to campaign as either a welterweight or a junior middle. She can do both.
Having debuted as a professional in March of last year and having fought 4 times last year and at least once this year, back in May.
This will be her 2nd fight of this year, and provided that everything goes to plan, she will have her 3rd in October for the EBU title at 147.
Dee Allen, 32 years old, great physical dimensions, great height, great length, and great power.
A promising fighter and a strong puncher. I question as to whether or not Dee Allen should continue to campaign as a welterweight beyond this weekend's fight, or should she shift her focus over to becoming a junior middleweight champion, since there are 3 vacant titles there.
She's got dynamite in that right hand.
Already seen her flatline 1 or 2 girls with that looping right, that overhand right. Serious power in that punch.
There are a number of attractive fights at 147. Big names. Bigger names than what you'll find at 154, but there still is Terry Harper, reigning WBA junior middleweight champion. At least one big name at junior middle.
You figure that if Dee Allen can see herself crowned a champion at 154 in either 1 or 2 fights, maybe 3, that's a fight that she can pursue. That there is at least one big name at 154. There's Terry.
So long as Dee Allen continues to stay in character and continues to rack up these highlight reel knockouts, she could fast become a fighter that is hard to ignore.
Seems a bit of a knockout merchant, and casual boxing fans, they do love knockouts. They do love a fighter that can finish strong. That appears to be Dee Allen.
It's good that they've got 2 fights on schedule for Dee Allen.
This weekend's fight is more of a maintenance fight, a tick-over fight, a keep-busy fight, just to get her out there, get her some more rounds.
I think the better, more interesting fight is the Beauchamp fight.
For the EBU welterweight title, this weekend's fight is at 154, then the fight in October is back down there at 147.
Kind of feel like she should stay up there at 154 on the premise that Dee Allen is a dangerous fighter. Anybody can see that. She can punch. She's a hot potato. The big names at 147 likely won't give her the time of day unless there is an incentive to do so.
Right now there isn't one, but if she were to, hypothetically speaking, become a champion or a unified champion at 154, they'd have to deal with her.
At some point.
You can go the mandatory route at 147, see about becoming the mandatory for Natasha Jonas or the winner of Ryan versus McCaskill. You could do that, but how long would it take before the sanctioning bodies actually order such a fight?
How long would it be?
Or you could go to 154, stay there, where there are 3 vacant titles, and see if you can't pick one up.
So that if you do, you could then pursue a fight with Terry Harper.
Dee Allen's got options. One thing's for sure. She's got options and she's got power. So we'll see what shakes out. Men's super bantamweight news on the heels of his monumental win yesterday. Now, I got Inoue says, I want to be undisputed by the end of this year. And given that Marlon Tapales, the only other champion at this weight, was ringside for the action, and that the sanctioning bodies themselves are not going to stand in the way. They're going to stand down. They're not going to order any mandatories for Marlon Tapales. It's conceivable that we might just get the undisputed super bantamweight title fight at some point later on this year, perhaps in the fall or winter months. I stated in my previous video that the Japanese have a long-standing tradition of holding a major fight on New Year's Eve.
Perhaps this could be that fight. Want to be undisputed before the end of the year, said Inoue to Top Rank Boxing. Can the grab ass and get the fight done? The only caveat, I think, is that Marlon Tapales is managed by Sean Gibbons. You might be familiar with that name. That's the same Sean Gibbons that used to manage John Riel Casimero, former WBO bantamweight champion. And you see the direction that he took that fighter in.
There was a plan in play in early 2020 before the pandemic shut everything down to do a unification match between Naoya Inoue and John Riel Casimero. And obviously the pandemic affected the sport, the global shutdown, all of that. Sean Gibbons made the decision to take John Riel Casimero over to the PBC side of things.
When the fight with Inoue couldn't materialize in a jiffy, due to the pandemic, the global shutdown, no live gates, no audiences in attendance, Sean took John Riel Casimero over to the PBC, and I can't say that he benefited in any way from it.
I believe he had 2 fights there, 2 title defenses of his then WBO title. One of those defenses was the defense against Guillermo Rigondeaux. What looked like a decent fight on paper turned out to be a stinker of a fight. You got John Riel Casimero, who's following Guillermo Rigondeaux in a straight line. He doesn't know how to cut off the ring, can't close off his exits, and you have Rigo doing laps around the ring, not sitting on his punches, just staying on his toes, circling away.
The action was far and few in between them because John Riel couldn't catch Guillermo Rigondeaux, but Guillermo wouldn't engage.
Outside of circling away, throwing the occasional pot shot, Guillermo Rigondeaux wasn't doing much out there. Neither guy got very much done in that fight, and it was a stinker of a fight, an awful fight to watch, bad press for both.
They both looked bad in that fight.
Fast forward, the WBO orders a fight between John Riel Casimero and Paul Butler. Paul Butler was John Riel's mandatory challenger. The fight was supposed to go down in the UK, and I guess that John Riel Casimero didn't realize that in the UK, by way of the BBBOC's bylaws, you're not allowed to use a sauna.
Wait, let me backtrack. Before Paul Butler even came into it, there were talks for a John Riel Casimero versus Nonito Donaire unification match. Nonito having stopped Nordine Oubaali for the WBC title, becoming WBC champion, talks arose for a unification match between them, between Nonito and John Riel. And Sean Gibbons mucked that entire situation up. That's the caveat here, that this is the same Sean Gibbons that manages Marlon Tapales. You see how he handled that situation between Nonito and John Riel, right? And the danger here. The danger is that he'll muck up this situation because that should have been a relatively simple fight to make, an easy fight to make between Nonito and John Riel. The falling out was due to VADA testing, anti-doping testing. In any event, I feel like Sean handled that situation poorly for John Riel.
The Donaire situation and just taking him over there, taking him to the PBC, not prioritizing the Inoue fight, that if John Riel ended up over there and things ended up working out the way they ended up working out, Sean Gibbons has a lot to do with that.
I'm just hoping that he learned his lesson and he doesn't muck up this situation.
Same way that he mucked up that one. John Riel Casimero ended up not having the Donaire fight, a fight between him and his mandatory challenger, Paul Butler. That ends up getting ordered. That was supposed to be over there in the UK, and I guess that John Riel didn't know. The BBBOC doesn't allow fighters to use saunas.
Comes to the Paul Butler situation, that fight got delayed once due to some kind of medical issue that John Riel Casimero claims to have had. The WBO grew impatient.
The fight first got delayed due to some medical issue that John Riel Casimero claims to have had, and once the fight was rescheduled and set to go down in the UK, John Riel Casimero ends up using a sauna, which is a violation of the BBBOC's guidelines. He ends up getting stripped of the WBO title.
WBO title ends up going to Paul Butler, who then loses it to Naoya Inoue late last year. This is the path. that Sean Gibbons put Jonriel Casimero on.
I'm just hoping that he learned his lesson from all of that and he doesn't muck up the Inoue versus Tapales fight the same way that he mucked up the Inoue versus Casimero fight.
There's no sense in pretending that there is some other fight out there for Marlon Tapales, something better for him to do. There's no sense in pretending that he can achieve the same stardom and the same popularity as Inoue, independent of Inoue. He can't.
The only way he can aspire to achieve the same notoriety as Inoue is by beating Inoue. It's the only fight to make, the best fight to make, but really the only fight to make at 122 pounds. So let's hope that Sean doesn't muck up this situation and he gets with the program.
Now, most people are going to favor Inoue to beat Marlon Tapales.
And he probably does. He probably does beat him. But for Marlon, the virtue is win, lose, or draw, win, lose, or fall. You get to fight in a big money fight, and make more money than you can make boxing anyone else. As a traveling champion, a unified champion, the only other champion at this weight, fighting Inoue is the most bang for your buck fight you can have.
Don't fight someone else and gamble losing those two titles, losing them to someone else.
Both the WBA and the IBF have decided to stand down and stave off ordering any mandatories for Marlon Tapales to keep the way clear for Marlon to take on Naoya Inoue.
And he was ringside, so just get the fight done.
It can happen, and for the men's super bantamweight division, it needs to, because there haven't been this many waves and in this many rumblings, this much talk about super bantamweight since Inoue arrived there, since Inoue decided he wanted to move up. So it's good for the division, it's good for the sanctioning bodies, it's good for the fighters, it's good for the fans, it's good for everybody. Just get the fucking fight done.
Can the grab ass in and get the fucking fight done.
Don't fuck this up. Upstairs at welterweight ahead of this weekend's mega match, Errol Spence says judging is not a concern at all. Fans will know who rightfully wins the Crawford fight. There is a feeling in some circles that Terrence can't hope to win a decision, that he has to take the fight out of the judge's hands.
Perhaps that's why Spence isn't concerned, because he knows in many ways Terrence is the away fighter.
It's not a concern, Spence told BoxingScene.com. It's not a concern at all. I'm not worried about it because there's nothing I can do. I mean, the judges, they're going to decide whatever they decide. But as long as, you know, the fans and everybody else sees it and knows who rightfully won, I feel like that's what matters.
The fight's too polarized for it to be that simple. Too many people are invested. The Crawford people, the Spence people.
The opposing factions of fans are eagerly waiting the outcome of this match in order to take the piss out of the other faction, the opposing faction.
I hope that the fight's outcome is decided without controversy.
Terrence Crawford looks at potentially divisive scoring of their pay-per-view main event the same way as Spence. It is up to him, Crawford contended, to make sure he leaves the judges no choice but to score their 147-pound title fight for him. My job is to go in there and do what I'm capable of doing and what I can control. Crawford told a small group of reporters recently, I can't control what the judges see or how they mark it down or how they score things. My job is to make sure there's no room for them to, cheat me or anything.
The feeling that he has to take the fight out of the judge's hands.
And the contention that he can, the contention that he will, it does come from Terrence Crawford's welterweight campaign so far, how his run is going, that since he's arrived at 147 pounds, he has quite literally stopped every opponent he's faced, from Jeff Horn to Jose Benavidez to Mean Machine, Kell Brock, Amir Khan, Sean Porter,
David Evanesian.
That in tandem with the feeling in some circles that Errol Spence Jr. is not now who he once was, that this is not the same Errol Spence from before the car accident.
So Brian McIntyre feels about it.
Bo Mack says that Spence waited too long, had a better chance against Crawford when he first moved up, highlighting that it's been years since Terrence Crawford moved up to welterweight, and he is now acclimated.
He's a welterweight.
They should have got him when he first came up from 140, said Bo Mack to FightHype.com during a recent interview.
Sound advice.
So it's a matter of public record that Errol Spence Jr., rather Al Heyman's plans for Errol Spence Jr., they did not involve Terrence Crawford, at least not immediately. I remember their initial meeting.
Remember when Errol Spence Jr. said that Al Heyman gave him 4 names?
Keith Thurman, Sean Porter, Manny Pacquiao, and Danny Garcia. Do you remember that?
Yeah.
Putting off this fight instead of taking care of Terrence Crawford immediately. Putting off this fight inadvertently gave Terrence Crawford all the time in the world, all the time that he needed to fully acclimate to the men's welterweight division, while at the same time, Errol Spence Jr. began to struggle.
What do you think he's talking about moving up right after this?
I saw a World Boxing News article published a day or so ago highlighting that Errol Spence Jr., he does look drawn. He does look somewhat gray.
Face sunken in.
For years now, I've speculated that Errol Spence Jr. has already overstayed his welcome at welterweight, and the signs are there where he couldn't stop Mikey Garcia.
I've said it a million times. I don't think for a second that same Mikey Garcia would have been able to go the distance with Terrence Crawford, but he did go the distance with Errol. Errol, who admitted he tried to stop him. He tried to get him out of there 2 times during their fight.
But he couldn't stop him, and I viewed that as an indicator that Errol Spence Jr.'s power is beginning to wane because he's been making welterweight for too long.
As well as his punch resistance.
I saw Sean Porter buckle him at least 2 times in their fight. Buckle him 2 times with a temple shot and a body shot. Errol Spence Jr.'s fans turned a blind eye to this. They pretend it didn't happen.
Whatever.
But I know what I saw, just like I know what I saw in the Yordenis Lugas fight. When Yordenis Lugas caught him with that uppercut,
he knocked his mouthpiece out of his mouth, at which point Errol goes looking for it, then he gets hit again, gets sent careening into the ropes.
For me and my money, these are all signs that in making welterweight, continuously making welterweight all these years, Errol Spence Jr. is leaving more and more of himself in the gym and bringing less to the fight.
Whereas Terrence isn't struggling. Terrence hasn't overstayed his welcome, not at 147.
When Beauchamp McIntyre says that Errol Spence Jr. waited too long to do this thing, I happen to agree.
But that's what his team wanted.
All that stuff about him cleaning up his side of the street first, thinking that time was a luxury.
Time was on his side.
Perhaps because he is some years younger than Terrence Crawford, but he's also bigger. The longer you drag this out, the harder the weight will become to make.
And I think we're there. That's where I think we are.
Sacrifice a fighter makes overstaying his welcome at a weight is his power starts to wane and his punch resistance.
Mm-hmm.